By 1873, Ira Sankey and D.L. Moody had already seen God work mightily in Chicago. From humble beginnings, their partnership had endured fierce criticism, a devastating fire, and difficult personal decisions, but their ministry had flourished. Now, after 2 years of fruitful work in America, they felt led to take the gospel abroad. That year, Moody and Sankey boarded an ocean liner and set sail for the British Isles, launching what would become one of the most influential evangelistic efforts of the 19th century. But their reception was far from warm at first. Their initial rally in York, England, drew a meager audience of barely 50 people. Much of the resistance stemmed from Sankey's controversial approach to music. The use of human hymns in congregational singing, as opposed to singing or chanting only psalms, was a divisive issue. Many also objected to the idea of solo performances during worship, both in Europe and in America. But the greatest offense, to some, was Sankey's use of a small SD reed organ to accompany his singing. Many believed the use of any musical instrument to accompany the voices of singers was wicked and worldly. This criticism was not new to Sankey. He had encountered similar resistance years earlier at his home church in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. During a meeting in Sunderland, England, Sankey was invited by the host pastor, Reverend Rees, to visit the home of the church treasurer, Mr. Longstaff, author of the hymn, "Take Time to Be Holy." Upon entering the living room, Sankey noticed a small organ similar to his own. He learned it had recently been used by gospel singer Philip Phillips, Sankey's early musical inspiration, during a prior visit. When asked to sing, Sankey sat at the organ and performed 3 hymns. Only later did he discover that Reverend Rees was firmly opposed to solos, choirs, and musical instruments, and had never permitted any of them in his church. Sankey grew anxious about how such strict views would affect their upcoming meetings. But a few days later, posters appeared throughout the city with a message that astonished him. D.L. Moody of Chicago will preach the gospel, and Ira D. Sankey of Chicago will sing the gospel in Bethesda Chapel every afternoon and evening this week, except Saturday at 3 and 7 o'clock. All are welcome. The notice had been written by none other than Reverend Rees himself. This was the first recorded use of the phrase, "sing the gospel," a description that became synonymous with Ira Sankey's ministry. Gradually, resistance to his style softened. His organ, his solo singing, and the introduction of hymns written by contemporaries such as Fanny Crosby and Philip Bliss found increasing acceptance, and many were brought to faith through the gospel truths in the songs he sang. A similar breakthrough occurred in Edinburgh, Scotland. On the 3rd night of a 3-month campaign, Sankey sat at his organ and noticed a familiar figure seated near the pulpit, Dr. Horatius Bonar, the revered Scottish hymn writer. Sankey later described the moment.
Of all the men in Scotland, he was the one man whose decision I was most solicitous. He was, indeed, my ideal hymn writer, the prince among hymnists of his day and generation. And yet he would not sing one of his own beautiful hymns in his own congregation, because he ministered to a church that believed in psalms only. With fear and trembling, I announced as a solo the song, "Free from the Law, O happy condition." No prayer having been offered for this part of the service, and feeling that the singing might prove only an entertainment and not a spiritual blessing, I requested the whole congregation to join me in a word of prayer, asking God to bless the truth about to be sung. In the prayer, my anxiety was relieved. Believing and rejoicing in the glorious truth contained in the song, I sang it through to the end. At the close of Mr. Moody's address, Dr. Bonar turned toward me with a smile on his venerable face, and reaching out his hand, he said, "Well, Mr. Sankey, you sang the gospel tonight."
Dr. Bonar later penned a public letter endorsing Moody and Sankey, writing,
"The more we know of them in private, the more do we appreciate them, and the more do we feel inclined to cast in our lot with them."
As crowds increased and hundreds were brought to Christ through the series of meetings, so did the criticism. Detractors accused Moody and Sankey of being agents for P.T. Barnum, claiming Sankey was simply trying to sell American organs. Despite the opposition and heartbreak, the Lord continued to bless the campaign. Moody and Sankey's meetings continued across the British Isles for nearly 2 years. To help congregations learn the new hymns by Crosby, Bliss, and others, Sankey compiled a 16-page booklet titled Sacred Songs and Solos, containing 23 of his favorites. At first, no publisher was willing to take it on, but once published, the first 500 copies sold out on the first day. Additional editions followed, with Moody contributing more selections. By the 6th edition, the book contained over 1,200 hymns. Another collection, Gospel Hymns and Sacred Songs, also compiled by Sankey and Philip P. Bliss, became widely used in both Britain and America. The evangelistic campaigns of Moody and Sankey continued in America and included 2 more tours in England and Scotland before Sankey's health began to decline. He eventually developed glaucoma and spent the final 5 years of his life blind. Having moved to Brooklyn, New York, Sankey spent time with his dear friend Fanny Crosby, who was also blind. During their final visit together, she said,
"The entire Christian world is praying for your recovery."
Sankey replied gently,
"Tell my friends, I hope to meet them all by and by, in the land where there is no more sorrow or pain, and where God shall wipe away all tears from our eyes."
Not long afterward, Sankey fell into a coma while singing the opening lines of Crosby's hymn, Saved by Grace. On August 13, 1908, just shy of his 68th birthday, Ira Sankey entered the presence of the one he had sung about for so long and to so many. Though Sankey composed several hymns, the one most closely associated with him is the 90 and 9. Yet his true legacy lies not in a single song, but in how he transformed congregational worship. The use of musical instruments, gospel solos, and human hymns in modern worship services all trace their roots in part to the ministry of Ira Sankey and the message he sang so faithfully.